This is the E-commerce Braintrust, a podcast about building momentum online for established consumer brands. Join our hosts and their expert guests for high-level conversations about e-commerce strategies, trends, and innovations. Access our Braintrust and boost your brand's e-commerce potential.
Welcome to the E-commerce Braintrust podcast. I'm Julie Spear, head of retail marketplace services at Acadia, alongside my co-host, Jordan Ripley, director of retail operations. And today we're bringing back our friend, our very own director of retail marketplace strategy, Petriello, to discuss how the savviest brands are balancing the needs of brand versus performance marketing, how to avoid life in ROAS Jail, and the all-important, we have a number of rules. We have a 95-5, we have a 60-40. I'd like to see if we could work in an 80-20 rule somehow in this conversation as well.
We should only cover one of those rules to truly 80-20 it. But
Ooh, I knew you'd have an angle there, Jordan. Welcome, Pat. Excited to get into all the rules with you today.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you, guys. There's a couple reasons I'm particularly excited about this one. One, because I admittedly have really been nerding out on this topic. Like, I've been thinking about it a lot. And two, and this will come up a few times, I'm a convert in a lot of the things that we're about to talk about. A lot of the things that we're about to talk about, I did not feel this way a few years ago. I think that makes this a little bit more interesting because if you're listening going, I know how I feel about this, just give it a chance. I've come around.
This will be your sort of the going clear ROAS episode where you were in the ROAS cult and now you're deprogrammed and we get to hear your journey.
Yes, and I hate that I know what you're talking about.
I'll need you to fill me in later.
Yeah, we'll have to clear that by legal before it.
Well, let's dig in. I'm excited that we have you on because I am aware that you've been nerding out on this lately. We've had a number of conversations about it. And so when Jordan and I were working on topics for the podcast, we're like, we've got to have Pat come on for this. So now you have the microphone, a platform, it's all coming together. One of the things we're going to talk a lot about today is the idea of really balancing brand marketing versus performance marketing. And really, that's hugely, hugely important for brands to consider, but it's often overlooked when you talk about retail media. And one of the things that you've talked a lot about is a lifetime sentence in ROAS Jail. Can you talk to me a bit about what sort of media management, marketing issues lead to a ROAS Jail sentencing?
Yes, absolutely. And as you can imagine, ROAS Jail is not a place you want to be. But don't feel bad if you feel stuck there, because really what we're going to talk about a little bit is I think most brands are either in or heading towards ROAS Jail. So obviously a good place to start is because we're using that as a bit of a fun term. What does ROAS Jail mean? And so when I say getting stuck in ROAS Jail, what I'm meaning essentially is brand marketers using ROAS as the exclusive North Star as the performance output for their paid ad strategy and making the assumption that, hey, if I'm getting 10x ROAS, 5x ROAS, job done, I must be growing the brand, I'm doing a good job. What we're seeing today is most brands, and I've seen this crosses categories and this even crosses sizes to most extent as well. Like this is not just a small or medium-sized brand issue. They've been ROAS addicted for a long time. And in part, it's because like what boards and P&Ls and CFOs understand is the language is, I give you $1, you give me back $5. When would that not be a good thing? And what that leads them to do, because ROAS is really a vanity metric, we can manipulate ROAS pretty easily. What that leads them to do is more retargeting of shoppers who are already going to find them anyway. So you're tapping people on the shoulder who already know about you. Increasing allocation in branded search. So again, people who are already looking for your brand and have probably had a high propensity to purchase from you anyway, or leaning more heavily into discounts because that's driving up click-through rates, it's driving up conversion rates, but you're also driving down your profit margins. And it's not just the quantity of those sales, it's the quality of those shoppers. Are those folks just coming to you because they're taking advantage of a discount that you're offering? And so those things can produce artificially high ROAS. That puts blinders on, and I'll tease what we're talking about next. And it's really brands focusing just on the 5% of shoppers who are in market at any given time, while ignoring the 95% of shoppers who maybe aren't in market again yet. So where I'm going with this with ROAS Jail is because of this, brands are focused on this very narrow band of shoppers at the bottom of the funnel, which also happens to be the absolute most hyper-competitive portion of the funnel. What happens? What do we hear? Every brand in Acadia's roster talk about. We see it on LinkedIn. CPCs are going up. CPMs are going up. CAC, customer acquisition costs, are going up. They get more expensive every year. Now we need to allocate more budget to get the same results as we did the previous year. So the CFO says, aha, I know how to do that. Let's get more efficient. Let's go further down the funnel. Let's get even more ROAS focused. And so it's ROAS Jail is almost like quicksand, where we as brand marketers continue to do these behaviors that lead us into a more difficult position than the previous year without truly incrementally growing the brand. So when we're exclusively chasing ROAS with direct response, or what's kind of more colloquially known as performance marketing, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit too. We're optimizing towards the short-term performance because it looks good on reporting. It's a lot of what people are gold on in their comp packages, but it's at the expense of what long-term brand building really looks like.
This is interesting for a variety of reasons. And I'm wondering, the ROAS component, I think so much in retail media has developed rapidly over the past several years, particularly from a measurement standpoint. And my question is, like, in your conversations with marketers and brand side folks, do you feel that this is a function of early on in retail media, there just wasn't a lot of good reporting and data? So it's like, if I can give my boss ROAS, that's basically all I've got. And we just have to go with that. And they knew better, but that was the numbers they had. Or do you get the sense that there's even still like a knowledge gap? If I'm a brand side marketer, a lot of them still need to be educated that no, the ROAS that you've held on to dearly is not as sacred as you thought. I'm curious where you see that. Is it a platform limitation or is it a real knowledge gap?
I think it's much more the latter, the knowledge and gap, maybe knowledge evolution than it is the former. And on its face, it's hard to walk into a room and say, your excellent ROAS is not only not necessarily growing your brand, your excellent ROAS is the problem. The easiest way to talk about that is you can go to any brand and be like, you want better ROAS? I'll cut your spend. I'll cut spend and get better ROAS. By cutting spend, am I growing your brand? Am I reaching new customers?
Yeah.
If I deeply discount all of your products, I'll show you great ROAS right away. But all I have done is devalued the brand, driven your profit margins down. And actually, if you want to talk from a pure financial P&L statement, I've reduced your free cash flow because I've reduced the profit margin that's coming in on these products. I think it's important in this too, because Jordan, to your question, brand has been, and we'll talk about this, brand has been talked about in this really squishy, vibey, like, are you doing brand, man? Which feels very vibes, but this is all about cold, hard financial facts for me. Brand is the way that you end up growing your brand reliably and sustainably from a financial standpoint. This is not just a agency saying, oh, you got to invest in brand because it's fun to do video or streaming TV. Like, this is about how brands are going to survive. Because I think if they're locked into that bottom 5% of the funnel, brands will die over time.
I mean, I guess you are an example of this, someone who's sort of come across that knowledge gap over your career. I think about starting when digital and performance marketing first became a thing. It was like those dummies at brand, like they don't know anything in terms of what their dollars are actually driving. And that was like when you're bidding on Google AdWords, it was like, oh, we can show you exactly how much money you're making. And that was the hot thing. There has to be a correction against that.
And the platforms haven't always helped. Like in the early days of Amazon DSP, which was AMG, and they'd say, your DSP campaign got 1 billion impressions. And you're like, did it though? We've come a long way since that.
Yeah. We'll get into the tactical stuff because that's obviously important here of like, how do you operationalize this? But staying at the conceptual level for a bit, the things that you've highlighted, and we'll go into some of the ratios that Julie hinted at, but was the work of Les Binet and Peter Field, the book that they had, that sort of seminal marketing knowledge, the long and short of it, of really understanding the blend of brand versus performance. And you talked a little bit about this fuzzy concept called brand, but I was wondering if you could give us a little primer of their work, the research that went in it, and how that sort of informs your opinion on this topic.
100%. And that's where some of the ratios are going to come in. Yeah. But I can't help myself here because I like to do this when I'm listening to other people's podcasts, when let's define what we actually even mean. And I know this seems silly to like define what brand means, but even the conversation we just had a moment ago, like brand is this fuzzy kind of amorphous concept. I want to put my stake in the ground to say, it's good to reflect here. Like, what does brand mean to us? And it sounds foundational because it is, but brand to me is not your logo, not your font, not your color scheme, not your typeface. Things like logo, font, color, taglines, jingles, those are tactics that do help change the way that people think about your brand. And those activities are branding. That's how you do branding. The output of the branding is brand. So when I say output, and again, I'm talking about, these are cold hard financials. Brand is the baseline revenue that you have when you turn off ads, you get rid of new product launches from an incrementality standpoint, and aggressive promotions. At this time when click and display costs are rising aggressively, as we talked about, a brand wants to ensure if you're paying for 100% of your sales, you have no baseline sales that you're leaning on. I mean, you can look at totally one end of the spectrum of like a brand new drop shipper. Not against drop shippers, but if they're not advertising, they have zero sales.
Right.
Obviously, complete other end of the spectrum, and this is not necessarily a good example. You look at Coca-Cola, they can shut off advertising. They don't have to do any discount. They're still going to have baseline customers. And I want to be careful with that example because you don't have to be Coca-Cola to engage in branding. That's very part of this. I think one of the important things here is when we talk about brand, is a strong brand is a value proposition that is really intended to get customers to intentionally find you. So the questions that are involved in ROAS Jail is like, how do I win these bottom of funnel auctions? How do I win these head search terms? You can get these efficiencies through performance marketing, but over time, brand is the only thing that's really going to lead to that reliable growth. The goal here is to have people seek out your brand directly and bypass that ad auction altogether so that they don't look for generic water bottle, right? This happens to be sitting right next to me. They look for Hydro Flask and then they go find me, not a client, so not a...
No kickbacks here, no arbitrage.
This is not a sponsored episode.
Yes. It could be. We're building towards that, clearly. But.
So the way I define this to get to the point here is one of the most important things for brand to strengthen is, okay, Pat, if we're not looking at ROAS, what are we looking at? Is the percentage of new customer revenue coming through owned and organic channels. I'll include Amazon in this. You say, well, Amazon's not owned and organic, but you can get a tremendous amount of organic sales through Amazon. And you should also see this reflected over time with an increase in people searching directly for your brand because they have some affinity towards it. Anyway, let me actually get to some of your questions because I know we'll jump into some of the ratios too, but two of the philosophies that came out of the work that you mentioned that resonated with me and are kind of underpinning this is brand building versus sales activation, which is kind of fundamental to what we're talking about here. Brand building is long-term strategy. It's emotional storytelling. It's broad reach. It's to create an emotional connection and mental connections. It's for recall. So when you're doing successful branding, your customers think of you. It emotes something in them. This is why creative and your creative deployment and the story that you tell is so important, where sales activation, short-term targeted ads, it's what your product features, price, promotion, get people who are shopping today to convert. And I think it's important here, and you guys have mentioned the word balance a couple of times, that it's a false dichotomy to me to say, should marketers do performance marketing or brand marketing? Real performance marketing is you have limited resources and you're supposed to balance how much growth you can generate in both the short term and the long term. That is our job as marketers. And then one of the other philosophies mentioned in the work was just the role of emotion in advertising. And again, going beyond things, it's just like, how many features does your widget have? How many HDMI inputs does it have? And to really create a connection. But I know Julie is going to press me here to dive into the ratios.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned balancing brand and performance marketing and how you kind of prioritize budget across the funnel for that. The moment that I've really been waiting for is to get into that 95-5 and that 60-40. Talk to me.
Okay.
Talk to all of us.
This is where I've really become a convert in this 95-5. And just to be fair, I should give a little bit of credit on the pod to Preston Rutherford, who has been posting about this on LinkedIn and was kind of my entry point into this philosophy. He didn't come up with the idea, but I'd be remiss if I didn't at least shout him out for some credit. So 95-5 rule says essentially this: at any given time, only 5% of your shoppers are actively shopping for what you sell. And if you think about this from a customer standpoint, it's true. 100% of the time, I'm not looking for all the things I need. You can see the baby gear behind me. I am very frequently needing diapers and toys and clothes, but not all of the time. Only 5% of your audience is in market. That's the audience that's receptive to quote unquote performance marketing, right? You're focused on product, price, promotion, all those things. For the other 95% of people who are not currently in market, those ads are somewhat wasted on that population because they don't resonate with them. They're not in market. That's the moment where you want to make a connection with that 95%. What we're seeing with ROAS Jail, to tie things full circle, is it is not uncommon for us to see 75, 80, 90% of a brand's budget focused only on that 5%. So it's a misallocation of where you can actually reach people. And it's the most expensive 5%. If you focus on branding and you build a connection with those 95% of folks who are not in market today, but who will be in market tomorrow, it's not about seeking immediate ROAS. You're not going to measure the impact of that in 1-day attribution or 7-day attribution. It's about turning those audiences into loyal customers who seek you out later. That's how you reduce dependency entirely on paid acquisition, which is really what a lot underpins this, and you build that scalable brand. Like I talked about, the allocations are kind of off there. So we think about the 95% in terms of the people not in market, but who will be. And we don't wait for them to come in market to start engaging with them. We engage with them beforehand. The 60-40 rule, I'm hesitant to use the word rule here, Julie. I'm going to call this the 60-40 guideline.
Recommendation?
Yeah, let's go there.
Framework? This
came from the work that Jordan spoke about, but I think it's a little aggressive. And so what their research suggested was that for optimal growth, a business should allocate 60% of their marketing budget to brand and 40% towards performance marketing, sales activation. I can see that. I think for digitally native brands, for digital first brands, I think that's actually really aggressive. And if I were a brand listening to this, I'd say, that's how am I going to get to that?
Aggressive in it is more brand allocation than you would expect.
What's happening right now is 80, 85, 90% of budgets.
That's a big swing in the other direction.
Yeah, it's a huge swing in the other direction. So what I would say then, to be more prescriptive, if I were a brand listening to this, I'd say get into 25 or 30% of your budget to be
or let's say 80-20.
Let's say 80-20 if we want to stick with ratio consistency here. I think the point here is maybe the exact number matters less and more about changing your framework and philosophy for what does success look like. You have this marketing budget. It is limited. You have choices in how you're going to deploy it. You have choices in how you're going to measure it and think about it and really ask the question, am I reaching people who were going to buy from me anyway? Am I reaching people who are only buying from me because I'm at a discount? Is 85% of my traffic coming from branded search and people who are already customers? Am I actually growing? And if you can't really confidently, when you put your head on the pillow, say, yes, those things are happening, this is opportunity.
Let's bring that to life a little bit. Do you have any brands in mind that do illustrate this concept really well? They're nurturing their brand. They're nurturing future customers. They're paying attention to that 95%. And then perhaps some others that could use a little mindset shift.
Yes, I thought about this. And Patagonia comes to mind for one of the, and I know that's a pretty basic response, and I will own that.
It was between them and Yeti, right? No.
Yeah, right. We have a 4-month-old here. And so I'll go, he was born in November. I was really thinking about what the experience was going to be like in the hospital when, and maybe this is overthinking it, but first time parent here. So
so there is no overthinking. The limit does not exist. Yeah.
Cut me some slack. And I forget who I was speaking to or reading or whatever. And they said, when they're born and you hold them, and what are you going to be wearing when you hold them? And you don't want like a hard zipper that's going to rub again. And all these things that probably don't matter, but I do. I didn't just go to Amazon and search like jacket or coat, which would have just put me in that bottom 5% of where there's hyper competitive ad auction. I went to Patagonia and I was like, what does Patagonia have that would suit me for this? I bypassed that ad auction altogether. I went right to Patagonia. And I was thinking, and so then I went back and I said, why do I feel that way? Why do I have that emotional connection? Because I'm prescribing this. So how did it happen? And I looked at emails from them and they were about ocean cleanups, rock climbing, route discoveries, wildlife protection campaigns, habitat restoration. All of those were emotional appeals. None of those said, come get this coat, buy this Nano Puff coat for me for 50% off, get it now. And over time, I was in the 95%. I didn't need that coat until I started thinking about what am I going to wear during this hospital stay? And that's what pulled me into the 5%. This is like a really good depiction of what I'm trying to communicate to brands is when I entered that 5%, I didn't start my journey. I was like, I have an emotional connection with Patagonia. I went right to them and I bypassed everything else. On the other side, when you talked about what brands are maybe in the other direction, I found this harder. And I was also like, I don't want to name and shame here. But since I was primed and thinking about apparel already because of Patagonia, I thought of, if you go to any of the sites they're all part of the same ownership group, Gap, Athleta, Old Navy, or Banana Republic. I never seen somebody buy anything full price from Banana Republic. I feel like it's always 40% off, 30% off. It's always price promotion product based. There's never been this emotional connection. I had Levi's included in my list originally. And then I thought, it's hard to make a case that Levi's hasn't in their history done a good job of emotional connection because they've really kind of built them up as Americana. But in the last 5 or 10 years, I think they've really kind of just become a like, get our jeans for $18 or whatever it might be. But I think the answer realistically is more brands than not continue to underinvest in making that brand connection. They still have that imbalance. That's an over-indexing on that 5%, over-indexing on ROAS as the North Star metric. It doesn't have to be that way, is really what my plea is.
Yeah. The thing too that I think about here is last year we talked a lot about retail media island and the importance of not siloing all your budgets. And particularly for these sort of, as you said, guidelines, right, of 60-40 and stuff, the specifics is less important than the actual concepts and understanding of how much of my budget is going to brand versus brand activation and how is that allocated also by channel. And this is where I feel like that siloing could really be an issue if it's like, oh, I'm only looking at my Amazon budget and I'm putting everything into activation there. And then I'm looking at it individually. It seems like you have to have that holistic view of this is how I'm building brand. And maybe some of that is happening on Amazon because I'm deploying a lot of video campaigns there that speak to emotional connection. But just because that spend is on Amazon, that doesn't make it activation. Is that a fair way to look at this, of less channel specific and more just marketing budget, goals, outcomes?
100%. I think, especially if you just look at the evolution of Amazon ads over the last 5 years. I mean, right? Going back to early days, sure, maybe they were sponsored products. It's interesting. I think this is actually where the strength of Amazon historically as this absolutely dominant version engine platform, that history, like their brand, works against them, because I do think there's a lot of legacy operators who still think of, oh, Amazon, that's just for demand capture, and social, that's for demand generation, and email is for this, without realizing that the Amazon ads tool suite, without sounding like pitching their platforms, you can do absolutely, we've talked about this a lot, do full funnel brand deployment through Amazon ads. And we've done it. We have case studies on it. It is not theory.
Yeah. I mean, let's get into the practical nature of this and get a bit more tactical. I think there's, particularly in the last year or two, as things tightened right across the sort of fundraising and investment space, as the economy maybe didn't seem quite as stable as we all thought it might be. And just in general, there's increased pressure on brand side to like watch your margins, make sure that your investments are actually delivering returns. And I think that pressure can lead to this idea of, well, maybe I'll just go back to ROAS because everyone understood what that was and I'm in the hot seat. So what else am I going to do?
Go deeper into jail.
right. Yeah, exactly. Keep tunneling. Not Shawshank Redemption style, but just deeper down. BA. What are your actual tactical recommendations here of I'm a VP of Ecom or I'm a CMO and I find myself in position and I'm trying to resist that temptation to just go back to the ROAS well? What are some of those initial things that I can start doing to reorient a little bit that might not be a massive investment that requires me to burn everything down, but starts to get me into the 95 zone?
Yeah, don't burn everything down. What I love about this question is if you really think about it, people potentially pulling back consumer spending or keeping more money in their pocket or delaying purchases, it actually makes the 95-5 rule the 98-2 rule. Because seriously, what it says is less people are going to be in market today. It amplifies the point around the 95-5 rule because you're going to have fewer people shopping. Yeah, so a couple of things, and I think this is really important because you don't want to get into a situation where you're the guy or the gal inside your brand pitching this murky ghost, like, we have to be brand centric. And you're like, I don't know how to measure that. That's not useful and not what we're suggesting. What we know over time is performance marketing alone always gets more expensive. Feel free to correct me when we've had brands come to us and say, oh man, my CPCs are down so much year over year. A loaf of bread is a nickel again, kind of thing. Like, that's not happening. Focusing on brand is the only way to reliably bring acquisition costs down over time. So the 3 questions a CMO or leadership in an organization can ask right now is, or look at in terms of what should I be measuring to even think about this, is what is the percentage of new customer revenue coming through organic channels, non-paid, and increase in branded traffic? You can do this on Amazon. Is that percentage, that new customer revenue, right? So we're talking about new to brand, we're talking about real incrementality. Is it higher than it was at the same time last year? Meaning, am I becoming more or less reliant on ads to drive all my sales as a percentage of my total sales over time? And what activities am I taking as a marketing organization to increase that percentage over time? And if you do that clear-eyed and you find that you're really just hitting the same pond of shoppers over and over and over and over again, it is really hard to continue to squeeze more juice or whatever, squeeze more liquid from that stone. And part of that is because people are tapped. Like there's only so much more incremental sales you can get out of that limited group. So I always say, grow the pond into a lake, grow the lake into an ocean. And where the fish are in that lake and ocean is your 95%. But continuing to just fish that 5%, that's how these brands stay in a small pond. So that's kind of a framework through which execs or marketing team could at least start to approach this.
Once you've committed to a 60-40, 70-30, 65-35, 80-20 framework, how do you measure it ongoing to make sure that you're not under investing in terms of the balance of branding versus performance related?
Yeah, part of this is going to be organization by organization. And I do think you can do this gradually. We're not saying like overnight, turn off all your performance marketing and throw it away. But I think one of the things you can do is some of the testing is be pretty ruthless. So what is truly incremental and what just looks good or feels good because the ROAS is high or because your CFO gives it your Google Sheet a thumbs up when they see that ROAS number? If you dial back ads, let's say for 50% of your audiences and your revenue only drops 10%, was that advertising really effective, actually? And I'm not even suggesting turn off 50% of your ads. I'm just using that as an example. And another way to look at this, Julie, is the better metrics than the ones that we spoke about above, not getting locked into ROAS jail and making sure that each campaign is measured with the appropriate KPIs for that funnel position. So I think one of the symptoms of a ROAS jail situation can be using ROAS to evaluate the efficacy of campaigns at every portion of the funnel. So not just your, conversion and loyalty, but also your awareness campaigns and things like that. So top of the funnel ads better measured by impressions, reach, brand lift studies, DPVR, which is detail page view rate. Those are better than ROAS and sales, at least in the short term.
So the key to that is really being clear on what is the ultimate objective. Start with the objective that defines the metric, as opposed to I have a hammer, so everything's a nail. Everything is measured by ROAS.
100%. And not doing that just because it feels good. But again, I think the key to this is how you will be financially successful, grow your brand, and make more money. Not just this is something we should do because brand seems sexy and fun.
I mean, it's fun. Brand is fun.
I want to end things, Pat, with giving you one more stake planning opportunity here. And this was when we first started talking about this concept for this episode. I thought about an opinion piece that Mark Ritson, he runs like a kind of CMO boot camp and is another marketing thought leader. But he wrote this piece of, there was this trend of the idea of performance branding, where you have a single campaign that's lifting you from a performance standpoint while also managing to accomplish branding. And he was saying that this is really a misleading area to go down as marketers of like, you have campaigns that can do activation, you have campaigns that can build brand affinity, but asking the same campaign to do both is a false pursuit. It won't do that effectively, right? That was his take. The thing that I think is an interesting contrast here is Amazon, as you said, has been such a low, will drive sales for your business, right? That's been the value proposition of Amazon for a decade plus. And now there's a lot of their investment is in this idea of, the longer term view of things, right? They have long-term sales attribution. They have multi-touch attribution. AMC is all about a better analysis picture of your customer journey and lifetime value calculations, that sort of thing. So Amazon seems to be a little bit living in that world of, we're a performance company, but also, hey, look at this. Here are all these brand metrics, right? I'd love to get your take on that idea of, can I do both performance and brand simultaneously with the same campaign? And also, how does Amazon reconcile with this concept? And what's your take on their positioning?
Yes, I love this. First off, I agree with Mark. I don't think you can ask a campaign to do both. Or you can, but you're really asking a campaign to do neither particularly well. And it's like setting up a test that's bound to fail. The issue is with the structure of the test. To go back to my example before, it would be hard for Patagonia to say, hey, we're working on this beach cleanup. Do you want to join? Buy this shirt with this coupon right now. And you go, what's happening? You'd be more confused, I think, than anything. To your question about Amazon, it's interesting. And obviously, we love working with Amazon and Amazon Ads. We're proud of Advanced Amazon Ads partner with them. I don't think this happens very often because Amazon is so good at so many things. I don't think they really know yet how to tell this story themselves to brands in a way that resonates with them. They're also burdened by who they are as the messenger, I think, sometimes, which is anytime Amazon comes to a brand and delivers something in this sort of way, it often gets received as, oh, here's Amazon just wants me to open up my budgets and spend more with them. They want me to not measure it. And there's some cynicism involved in that. And some of that cynicism was earned because, again, not all the product releases and the way this stuff has been messaged has always been great. And so I do think, and I try to lead with empathy here and even give Amazon some compassion in terms of they are still learning how to fine tune and tell this story. I actually think partners like ourselves are probably better positioned in this moment to be able to kind of articulate and explain it. And we're closer to the brands more often than not to like really intimately, truly know what their issues are and what their problems are and what success looks like for them to do it. And then, Jordan, to your point, Amazon's also burdened a little bit by their history, like we talked about before. They have just been for so long, even dominant isn't the right word, just the absolute leader in being a conversion engine, that it is difficult for them to reposition how people think of who they are and where they fit in the mix. It is happening. It's just happening slowly because of how good they've been at this one thing for so long.
To change their brand.
To do branding.
Dare I say.
Brandception right there.
And in the industry, we call that full circle.
That's right. That might actually be the perfect note to end on. Pat, thank you for coming on. I am glad that this is a topic you've been nerding out on and talking about, and that we were able to have a discussion about it today. And truly enjoyed getting to use a lot of ratios, bring those to life. So thank you for joining us. And I know we'll have you back on again soon to talk about another topic relative to retail media and marketplaces.
Yeah, this is awesome. And I think we'll keep talking about this one too, because I think this one's meaty and going to continue to evolve. So very much appreciate you guys having me on. The
sequel, maybe we'll have a new ratio.
I'll get cracking. On it.
Thanks, Pat.